The stars had always been a comfort to Mara Vasquez. As a child in the highlands of Oaxaca, she used to drag a sleeping mat to the roof of her grandmother's house and lie there for hours, watching the Milky Way wheel overhead like slow fire. She'd been told the stars were the campfires of the dead. She'd believed it until she was old enough to understand astronomy, and then she missed believing it. She was 34 years old when she stopped finding the stars comforting. It happened on a Tuesday in July. She was standing on the observation deck of the Tenochtitlan Array, Mexico's contribution to the global SETI network, a dish farm spread across the high plateau like a fief of chrome sunflowers, watching a contact report scroll across her terminal. The signal had been picked up 11 minutes earlier. Now half the astronomy community on Earth was awake and scrambling, and the other half was about to be. "It's not a pulsar," she said to no one in particular, because Emilio had gone for coffee 20 minutes ago and hadn't come back. "It's not a magnetar. It's not background radiation." She sat with her hands flat on the desk and said the last part very quietly, almost like a prayer run backward. "It's a carrier wave." Emilio came back with the coffee. He saw her face. He set the cups down without a word and looked at the screen. Outside, through the reinforced glass of the observation deck, the stars wheeled on. They were beautiful for perhaps another 40 minutes. Then the first of the objects crossed into naked-eye visibility. A shape moving against the stars that moved wrong, blotted out constellations in a hard-edged line. That was not a comet or a satellite, or any of the 1,000 comfortable explanations human brains tried to reach for. It moved with terrible patience. It was the patience of something that had done this before. Mara watched it cross the sky above the array, her coffee going cold, and felt the specific quality of fear that comes not from the unknown but from the known too late. She picked up the satellite phone. She called a number she'd memorized but never used. It rang twice before a voice she didn't recognize answered. "We see it," the voice said. "We've been seeing it for 6 hours. We needed confirmation from a civilian source." A pause. "Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. Please move your personnel to the lower facility. The entrance is the third door past the generator room. You'll need your ID and your thumbprint. We'll explain when you get there." "Explain what?" "That this isn't the first time." She didn't move for a long moment. Through the glass, the object, she couldn't call it a ship yet, mind kept sliding away from the word, had halved the visible sky. She called her team in. The facility beneath the array was not what she had expected. She'd expected concrete bunkers and military men who wouldn't meet her eyes. What she found instead was a long corridor lit by fluorescent panels, lined with filing cabinets that went back decades, and a large room at the end of it that smelled of ozone and old metal, and something else she couldn't place. Something faintly biological. A man named Colonel Fuentes met her at the door. He was 60, lean, with the kind of face that had long since decided not to be surprised by anything. He shook her hand with both of his. "How many do you have up there?" he asked. 8 people, my team. All of them cleared for what they're about to see." She looked at him. "Colonel, there is a ship the size of a small moon currently positioning itself above the Valley of Mexico. I think the clearance conversation can wait." He almost smiled. "Fair point." He held the door open. The room beyond it had a ceiling 30 feet high. In the center of it, suspended in a cradle of steel struts and old catwalks, was an alien spacecraft. It was perhaps 15 meters long, delta-shaped, with a surface that absorbed light in a way that made it hard to look at directly. One wing was crumpled. The hull bore scorch marks that had been there for decades. She could tell by the oxidation pattern. Standing beside it, small and human and slightly ridiculous, was a man in a lab coat who was grinning like it was Christmas morning. "Dr. Vasquez," Fuentes said. "This is Dr. Aurelio Pimentel. He's been with us for 22 years. 23, Pimentel said. He had a shock of white hair and ink stains on 3 fingers. And he was already walking toward Mara with the energy of someone who had been waiting his whole career for this conversation. "I've read your carrier wave analysis from 2019, the part about recursive signal structures. You were close. You were very close. Come, look at this panel. I'll show you where you were right and where you went slightly sideways." "Doctor," Fuentes said quietly. Pimentel stopped, looked at the ceiling, registered something. "Right," he said. "Context first." He lowered his hands. can tell you is that vessel came down 61 years ago. We recovered 3 occupants, 2 deceased, 1 alive for 11 days. In 11 days it told us everything it wanted us to know, which, we eventually realized, was almost nothing of any use. It told us what they were called. It told us how far they'd traveled. It told us very deliberately that they were advanced scouts. And then it died. The silence in the room was the kind that fills its own volume. Mara said, "Advanced scouts for what?" Pimentel said, "Exactly what is currently parking itself over 16 major population centers around the world." She looked at the crumpled ship in its steel cradle. She looked at the scorch marks. She thought about the carrier wave on her terminal. The countdown she'd decoded, without fully recognizing it as one, recursive structure that she'd almost cracked in 2019, that she'd written up and filed and moved on from, because the signal had stopped. "It didn't stop," she said. "The signal in 2019. It didn't stop. It was always there, wasn't it? It's been broadcasting continuously. We just couldn't hear it cleanly." Fuentes said, "We've been hearing it clearly for about 14 months. And you didn't. We didn't know what it meant until approximately 4 hours ago when the fleet dropped below the orbit of the moon." He said it without apology, in the flat tone of a man who had made a decision he stands behind, even knowing how it looks. "We needed time to prepare." "Prepare what?" He looked at her steadily. "That's what you're here to help us figure out." Her name, when she found out, turned out not to be her name at all. It was a designation. The entity they had recovered in 1962 had a designation that translated, roughly through its own communication system, as something like the one who counted, which told them it had been a navigator, which told them the others had been something else. This was the first useful thing Mara worked out in the 40 hours after the ships appeared. The second useful thing happened at 3 in the morning on what everyone was already calling day 2. When Pimentel found her in the cafeteria, drinking her 8th coffee, and staring at a printout of the recursive signal structure, and sat down across from her and said without preamble, "It's a biological lock." She looked up. "The signal," he said. He put his own printout on the table. It was covered in 40 years of handwritten annotations, layered in different inks, and it smelled of coffee and old paper, and a lifetime of thinking about one problem. "I've been reading it wrong. We all have. We assumed it was communications, point-to-point broadcast. But look at the recursion depth." He pointed. His finger was trembling slightly, not with age but with the specific tremor of a man who is certain of something and frightened by his own certainty. "It doesn't recurse like a signal. Curses like a key." Mara looked at the printout. She looked at her own. She put them side by side on the table, and they matched. Her 2019 analysis and his 40-year-old one, separated by time and institution and methodology, arriving at the same structure from different directions. "A key for what?" she said. "Their ships have a defensive system," he said. "A field. It deflects everything. Kinetic weapons, missiles, particle beams, everything we've tested. We've been testing quietly since the first ships appeared. Nothing penetrates." He paused. "The field has to be coordinated. It's not a passive system. It's actively maintained by a signal broadcast from something much larger. Their command vessel. If you interrupt the signal, the field drops," she said. "For every ship simultaneously," he said. "Every ship in range of the command broadcast, which, based on the power levels we're measuring." He looked at her. "That's all of them." She sat with that for a moment. "How do you interrupt a signal you can't transmit on?" she said. He pointed at the crumpled ship in its cradle. She'd walked past it 4 times in the last 2 days, and it had stopped alarming her. Now she looked at it differently. "You found a transmitter," she said. "I found the mounting bracket where a transmitter should be," he said. 61 years ago. I've been building what should go in it ever since." She stared at him. "You built one." "I built 6, actually. The first 4 didn't work. 5th I'm not totally sure about. The 6th one." He reached into the pocket of his lab coat and produced something small and dark and dense, looking roughly the size and shape of a deck of playing cards, and set it on the table between their coffee cups. "The 6th one I think is right. I think it'll transmit on their frequency. I think it'll inject the right pattern into their field maintenance signal." He paused. "I need someone who understands recursive wave structures to verify my math." Mara looked at the device. She looked at the printouts. She looked at Aurelio Pimentel, who was 71 years old and had spent more than half his life in a basement, working on a problem no one else was authorized to know about, and she thought, he didn't give up. It was such a human thing. Such a specific, maddening, stubborn human thing, to spend 40 years in a basement building the sixth version of something. Show me the math, she said. Above them, the city was trying to survive. Mexico City's 17 million people, the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, had been given 24 hours of warning by the time the first energy discharge lit the sky to the north. The government had announced evacuation, which had been partially effective. The roads south had been gridlocked within an hour. The metro stations had become shelters. A woman named Dolores, who ran a taqueria on Calle Mazones, had spent the whole of day one making food and handing it through the shutter to a line of people who stretched round the block. She'd kept cooking until the gas ran out, and then she'd kept going on canned heat, because what else were you going to do? Because the line was still there. A man named Tio, who was 17 and had been planning to start university in September, had organized the ground floor of his apartment building into a medical post because he'd done a first aid course 2 years ago, and that made him the most qualified person available. His hands had stopped shaking by the middle of the second day. He wasn't sure what to make of that, whether it meant he'd become brave or just numb, or whether those were the same thing. An old woman named Senora Esparza, who was 83 and had survived the 1985 earthquake, anyone who'd listened that they'd survived that too, and they'd survived this. Most people listened. Some of them even believed her. The alien ships had not fired on the city. Not yet. They were waiting for something. Mara had been awake for 31 hours when Fuentes called her into the communications room, and she saw the joint military feed for the first time. A map of the world dotted with 16 ship positions, surrounded by moving indicators of military assets, and a set of running casualty figures from 3 cities that had been struck in what appeared to be warning shots. Not full discharges. Partial. Deliberate. They're demonstrating capability, the analyst on the feed was saying, not prosecuting an attack. They want us to understand what they can do. Why? Someone on the feed asked. Unknown. Possibly to induce surrender without having to expend the resources of a full strike. Mara looked at Fuentes. He looked at her. She thought about what Pimentel had said. Their kind traveled from planet to planet, consuming, moving on. They would have done this before. Many times, perhaps. Many planets that had surrendered without a fight, because the mathematics of the situation were clear and biology is reluctant to die. Many planets that had looked at the demonstration discharge and folded. She thought about Dolores and her taqueria and her canned heat. She thought about Teo and his stopped shaking hands. She thought about Senora Esparza, who had already survived the ground opening up beneath her city once, and had decided it didn't count as a reason to stop. They think we'll fold, she said. Almost everyone does, the analyst said. In the historical pattern, the message patterns we decoded from the 1962 vessel, there are linguistic markers that suggest previous contact with other civilizations. The pattern of approach suggests an expectation of compliance. Then they've never met us before, Mara said. Fuentes almost smiled again. She was beginning to understand that almost smiles were his version of enthusiasm. No, he said, they haven't. The math took 11 hours. Not because it was wrong. Pimentel's math was extraordinary, meticulous, and elegant in the way that only years of obsessive refinement can produce, because she found 3 places where it needed to be different to account for the specific characteristics of the carrier wave she'd analyzed in 2019, which had slightly different modulation properties than the one he'd been working from. Each fix led to another adjustment. The 6th device had to be partially rebuilt. Pimentel did not complain. He did not defend his original work as though it were his child. He listened to each point she raised, checked it against his own notes, and said either, yes, you're right, or check this, and showed her why she wasn't. And twice they disagreed so fundamentally that they both went away for an hour and came back and had a conversation that lasted until dawn, with a chalkboard between them that got very full. She had never worked with anyone like him. She found herself thinking that he reminded her of her grandmother, Not in any visible way, but in some deep structural sense, the way both of them simply took problems as they were, and sat with them without flinching and without rushing. On what became the morning of day 3, she looked at the rebuilt device and said, "I think it'll work," he said. "I know it will work. I have thought it would work for 11 years. You've just made it actually true," she laughed. It surprised her. She hadn't thought she had a laugh left in her. "What's the range?" "Inside the command ship's broadcast radius. Maybe 200 kilometers, ideally closer. The signal needs to intersect the main broadcast beam cleanly." She looked at him. "We need to get it close." "Yes. How close?" He looked at the crumpled ship in its cradle. She followed his gaze. "Aurelio," she said. "The propulsion system works," he said. "I've run it in place 7 times, the navigation system. You've never flown a spacecraft." "I've flown a Cessna." "That is not, Dr. Vasquez." He said it very gently, with the tone of someone who is not asking permission. "I have spent 43 years preparing for this specific moment. I am not going to sit in the basement while someone else flies my ship to its target." She looked at him for a long time. "You'll need a co-pilot," she said, "for the signal injection. The targeting calculations require—" "Yes," he said, "I know." She had known, from about the 7th hour of working on the math, that it would come to this. She looked at the crumpled alien ship and thought about what her grandmother used to say, lying on the roof under the stars. "The dead are watching. Go do something worth watching." "Walk me through the propulsion controls," she said. They told Fuentes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I should tell you that I can't authorize this." "I know," Mara said. "I should also tell you that I'm not going to stop you." She nodded. "The window," he said, "is approximately 6 hours. After that, our military analysts believe the ships will begin full strikes. They're reading the delay as a command-level decision, not a mechanical one. Someone is waiting for an order, and the order is coming." He paused. "I want you to know that there are coordinated ground attacks planned across all 16 sites simultaneously. If you can drop the shields, those attacks go forward in the same moment. If the shields hold, those attacks are—" He didn't finish. "Suicidal," Mara said. "Expensive," he said, "militarily speaking." He looked at her. "There are people flying those planes who know the math. They're flying anyway." She thought about Tio, and his stopped shaking hands again. The specific texture of human courage that looked from the outside like stubbornness and the inside like, "I have nothing better to do with myself than this." 6 hours, she said. 5.5 now. She shook Fuentes' hand. He held it for a moment. He said, "My daughter is in Guadalajara." He said it without any particular emphasis. The way you say a thing that means everything. "I know," she said, though she hadn't. "We'll get the shields down." Getting the ship out of the facility was, logistically, the most complicated thing Mara had ever been part of. There was a ramp. Pimentel had made sure there was a ramp decades ago, because he'd always known this moment was coming. There were 4 engineers who'd been cleared for access to the program, and who handled the unmooring with a practiced efficiency that told her they'd drilled for this. There was a moment, as the crumpled ship slid up the ramp and into the cold morning air above the plateau, where the light caught the alien hull, and it absorbed the light wrong, and Mara's stomach turned over. Then the ramp sealed and the hull was just hull, and she was inside it, in a cockpit that had been retrofitted, with human instruments clustered around, the alien controls like barnacles. And Pimentel was in the co-pilot seat running his pre-flight check from a laminated card. He had a laminated card. "You made a laminated card," she said. 11 years ago, he said. "It's laminated because the original got coffee on it." He flipped to the second side. "The main propulsion engages on this." He indicated a surface that was not quite a button and not quite a dial. 2 seconds. "The navigation response is faster than you expect. Very fast. Try not to overcorrect." "What happens if I overcorrect?" "You know those 6 prototypes I mentioned." She looked at the control surface. She put her hand near it without touching. She took a breath. Outside, very faint, she heard what she'd been hearing for 3 days. The constant low subsonic vibration the alien ships produced felt more in the chest than the ears. A sound that her body had been interpreting as dread. She sat with it for a moment, and let it be what it was, and let herself be afraid of it, and then she set the fear down on the floor of the cockpit and left it there. Ready, she said. The ship lifted. It was nothing like a Cessna. It was nothing like anything she had a word for. The response was so immediate and so total that the first correction she made felt like thinking. Like the ship was reading an intention before it. Became a gesture. She overcorrected. She undercorrected. For 45 seconds she flew in an embarrassing zigzag pattern above the plateau while the engineers on the ground watched from the entrance and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Then she found it. The calibration point, place where her hands and the ship's response reached an equilibrium, and after that it was not easy, but possible. The way difficult things become possible when you've already decided to do them. Northeast, Pimentel said. He was reading from a tablet, and his voice was steady. The command broadcast will be strongest at approximately 40 kilometers from the ship's geometric center. I'll start the targeting sequence at 30. How long will the sequence take? 90 seconds. If the field injection works on the first attempt, and if it doesn't. I'll try again. I've thought about this a great deal. He looked at her sideways. Did you eat this morning? What? You haven't eaten in 8 hours, I noticed. I thought about mentioning it earlier, but there was math. He reached into the pocket of his lab coat, still in his lab coat in an alien spacecraft, at 1,000 meters altitude and climbing, and produced a tamale wrapped in foil. My wife makes yesterday. She makes them when she's worried. There are 11 more where this came from. She stared at him. We have 4 minutes before the targeting window, he said, and held out the tamale. She took it. She ate it one-handed, flying northeast over her city, and it was good. Masa and pork and a green salsa that tasted like a garden. Like the kind of ordinary life that was supposed to keep on. That was going to keep on going. She was going to make sure of that. Thank you, she said. Thank Lucinda, he said. She knows you're up here, by the way, I told her. What did she say? She said you'd better not scratch the ship. He paused. She also said you were very impressive, and that I should say so on her behalf. Mara set the tamale wrapper on the floor next to the fear she'd left there. 3 minutes, Pimentel said. Above them, the alien ship was an absence in the sky, a shape that wasn't there except where it was, defined by what it blocked. She could see the underside of it now, dark and textured in a way that didn't resolve into pattern, that seemed to change slightly when she moved her eyes. It was enormous. It was the most enormous thing she had ever seen. It was the size of a city, floating above a city, and there were 15 more like it around the world. And they had done this before. They had come to planet after planet, and waited out the demonstrations, and accepted the surrenders and moved on, left behind whatever was left after the resources were taken, which was presumably not much. Not this time. She did not say that out loud. It was the kind of thing that was better felt than said. 2 minutes, Pimentel said. He was working the targeting system. A sequence of manipulations on the alien controls that he performed from memory, his hands moving with a fluency that 43 years of practice had put there. Signal lock in 90 seconds. She flew. The subsonic dread vibrated in her chest. She flew toward it, into it, and felt it become something else in her chest. Not dread, not comfort. Something more like purpose, which is related to both but distinct from each. The alien ship filled the sky. 60 seconds, Pimentel said. His voice had changed slightly. Not afraid, something fiercer than afraid. Signal lock acquiring. She heard a tone from the device they'd built. Her math and his device. And 43 years. And 11 hours and the specific stubbornness of people who do not accept the premise that they cannot win. 40 seconds. Below her she could see the grid of the city, the streets, buildings, the parks. People were down there, Dolores and her canned heat. Tio and his stopped hands. Senora Esparza and her 83 years of surviving things that were supposed to be unsurvivable. 20 seconds. A sound from the alien ship above them. A tame change in the vibration quality. Something that might have been a response, a recognition. They'd been noticed. Aurelio, she said. 10, he said. 9, 8. A beam of light extended from the underside of the alien ship. Not at them. Not yet. A ranging beam, the kind of pre-fire sequence she'd seen in the analysis footage of the cities that had been struck. Ship was targeting. 7-6. She didn't move. Every nerve in her body said move. She held the ship steady. 5-4. The beam focused. She saw it focus. She understood what was about to happen, and she made a very specific, conscious, deliberate choice to stay exactly where she was, because the signal needed 90 seconds and they had done 83, 3, 2, 7 seconds left, 1. The device sang, a sound she felt before she heard, a vibration at the edge of perception that nevertheless had a quality to it, a correctness, the way a key in the right lock feels different from a key in the wrong one. She knew before Pimentel's instruments confirmed it that it was working. She knew it the way you know things that are true all the way down. Signal injected, Pimentel said. His voice was very calm. Field disruption in. The beam fired. It fired past them, past not at, because in the 7 seconds of remaining sequence time, the alien vessel's targeting had shifted, was shifting, recalculating. Something was wrong with its systems. Something had been introduced into the maintenance signal that it was trying to identify and compensate. It was very intelligent. It almost compensated in time. Almost. The beam struck the plateau 3 kilometers south off of the array facility. Shipped. Mara was already banking hard, throwing the ship into an evasion pattern that felt more like instinct than thought, and Pimentel was gripping the co-pilot console with both hands and reading from his instruments and not screaming. She noted and respected enormously. Shields, he said. Dr. Vasquez. Shields. She heard it before he finished. Heard the quality of the subsonic vibration change. Felt it change in her chest. The dread becoming something else. The oppressive certainty of invulnerability becoming something that had a crack in it. A human-made crack. Crack made of 43 years and 11 hours. And a tamal in foil and the specific choice to not move when everything said move. Shields are down, he said. All of them. Global broadcast disruption confirmed. He looked at his tablet, he looked at her. For just a moment, through the steadiness, she saw the boy who had first walked into a classified basement at the age of 28, with a theory and a refusal to be wrong about it. We did it. Below them, everywhere on Earth, the coordinated attacks began. She landed the crumpled ship on the plateau, without killing either of them, which she considered a significant personal achievement. The landing was not graceful. There was a moment of contact that was less a touchdown and more a negotiation between the ship's landing struts and the ground's unwillingness to accommodate them. And then there was stillness. The engine cycled down in a sound that descended through registers she could feel in her back teeth. She sat there for a moment, just sat. Outside, through the scratched viewport, the sky was full of fire. Not the alien kind, the human kind. Missiles and interceptors, and the specific brightness of metal burning in the upper atmosphere, the light of a fight that was finally possible because the mathematics of it had finally been changed. Had been changed by a device the size of a deck of cards, built by a 71-year-old man in a basement, verified by a woman from Oaxaca, who used to sleep on her grandmother's roof and watch the stars. Pimentel was checking his instruments one more time, methodically. He'd always been methodical. 73% shield disruption across all active units, he said. The remaining 27% will degrade within 40 minutes as the maintenance signal fails to self-correct. He set the tablet down. The attacks are landing. She nodded. She thought about the alien navigator that had been recovered in 1962 and had spent 11 days talking to humans before it died. She wondered what it had made of them. Whether it had reported back anything useful to whoever sent it, whether it had expected to be the last advanced scout, or whether it had expected to be followed by the full fleet and by the easy conquest that had, presumably, worked before. She hoped it had been surprised. Aurelio, she said. What are you going to do when this is over? He thought about it, actually thought about it, in the unhurried way of someone who has earned the right to think slowly. Sleep for approximately 3 days, he said. Then I want to look at the data from the signal injection. The way the alien system responded to the disruption, there's information there. There are things we can learn. He paused. You? She looked out at the burning sky. It was ugly and it was terrible, and in some specific way it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, because it was proof of something. Proof that the mathematics of surrender were not the only mathematics available, that there was another set of numbers in which the answer was no, in which the answer was not quietly, not without a fight, in which the answer was, we have people who will fly a crumpled alien ship toward a targeting beam because the signal needs 7 more seconds. "I want to call my sister," she said. "She's in Guadalajara." Pimentel looked at her. "I know," she said. "I'll explain later." He smiled, a full smile, not an almost smile. It was a good face for smiling. The final alien destroyer over the Valley of Mexico held out longest. They tracked it on the facility's instruments, a running feed of its status as the human attacks degraded it, as its hull took damage that the dormant shields could no longer deflect, as systems failed in cascades that Mara could follow now, read in the data, could understand as the logical consequence of a key inserted into the right lock at the right moment. It fired twice more, radically. One discharge went wide. The other struck the eastern edge of the city's industrial district and started fires that the emergency response teams were already moving toward. Then at 14:32 on the fourth day the ship went dark. Not an explosion. She'd expected an explosion. It simply went dark. The lights, the running lights that had been visible even in daylight, simply ceased. The subsonic vibration that had lived in her chest for 4 days stopped. The absence of it was so sudden and so total that she felt it as a physical shock, like a sound that had always been there turning off. The ship fell. It fell slowly at first, the way something that large takes time to accept that it no longer has support, and then faster, and it fell over the mountains east of the valley and struck them in a silence that lasted for half a second. Before the sound arrived. A sound like every thunderstorm that had ever happened, all at once. The dust cloud rose above the mountains. It was enormous. It would be visible from space. In the facility, nobody moved for a long moment. Then Fuentes said quietly, "All 16 destroyers are down or disabled. Mothership is silent." He listened to his earpiece. Global confirmation. Assets in all theaters report success. He set down the radio. He sat down in his chair. He put his hands flat on the table, and he sat there. Emilio, who had driven south from the array facility with the rest of her team on the first day and arrived at the underground facility 3 hours later with coffee still somehow in his hands, appeared in the doorway. He was looking at the data feed. He looked at Mara. "We did it," he said. It was not a question, but his voice made it sound like one, because the brain takes time to catch up to facts that are too large. "Humanity did it," Pimentel said. He was still in his lab coat. He had, she realized, been in the same lab coat for 4 days. "We just changed the variables. From somewhere above them, from the city, from the 17 million people, and the taqueria, and the makeshift medical post, and the woman who was 83 and had already survived the ground opening up, there came a sound. It took Mara a moment to identify it. It was a sound she associated with football matches and concerts and New Year's Eve. The specific occasions when human beings make the same sound at the same time, when joy becomes too large to be contained in individual bodies and spills over into shared air. It was people cheering. It was a lot of people. It was, possibly, everyone. She walked up the corridor, up the ramp, past the filing cabinets, and out into the afternoon light. She stood on the plateau above the array. The chrome sunflowers still pointing at the sky, still listening, still watching, and she turned her face toward the sound. The dust cloud from the fallen ship was a brown smear above the eastern mountains. The sky above her was clear and blue and empty of things that shouldn't be there. She looked up. She found, to her own surprise, the stars. Not visible yet, it was afternoon, but present, always present, waiting for the light to fail so they could be seen. Felt like a comfort again. Not because she'd stopped understanding what they were, because she understood them better now. They were enormous and cold and mostly empty. They were full of things that would come to you when you weren't looking and would assume you would fold, and the stars had never met humanity before. She stood on the plateau in the afternoon light, listening to her people cheer. She let it be enough. She let it be everything. 3 weeks later, she went home to Oaxaca. She drove. She'd wanted to fly, but the airspace over the valley was still managed, still full of survey aircraft and cleanup coordination. And anyway, she wanted to see the roads, wanted to see the country going about the business of surviving. It was doing, with the same methodical stubbornness it had always brought to everything. The highlands were green. It had rained the day before, and the sky was the particular blue that only comes after rain in high altitude. A blue so deep it was almost a sound. She stopped on a road above the valley where she could see for 50 kilometers, and she sat on the hood of the car. And she ate an orange she'd bought at a roadside stand, and she watched the light change over the mountains. She had a satellite phone in her pocket. Pimentel had put her contact information in the secure network. She was officially, as of 48 hours ago, of something that had a classified name she hadn't been authorized to know yet. It would mean more basements, probably. More laminated cards. More math on chalkboards at 3 in the morning. More problems that no one had solved before, that needed solving before a deadline that was not negotiable. She found she didn't mind. Her grandmother's house was 3 more hours south. Her sister would be there, had been there for 2 weeks, waiting with the rest of the family in the relative safety of the mountains, calling every day, crying a little on the calls, fusing to acknowledge the crying. She had a lot to explain. She had a lot to not explain, technically for security reasons, which meant she would explain it all eventually, because she was not, on reflection, any good at not explaining things. She finished the orange. She looked at the sky. Somewhere up there, spread across the dark, were the systems the fleet had come from. It was a long way. It was not far enough. Today, the sky was empty and blue, and the mountains were green, and the roads were full of people going somewhere, and the taqueria on Calle Maisons had opened again. She'd checked. It was one of the first things she'd checked, and Senora Esparza had given an interview to a news channel in which, she'd said, with the specificity of someone who has survived more than one unsurvivable thing. I told everyone. I told them we'd be fine. She'd been right. They almost always were. Mara got back in the car. She drove south toward her family through the green highlands, under the deep blue sky that went all the way up to everything.